All right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, while the rest of the political press was busy obsessing over excerpts from Trump's niece's book that don't tell us anything new about the man that we already don't know, the New York Department of Financial Services filed a bombshell multi-page complaint against Deutsche Bank yesterday, mourning for its years-long banking relationship with now deceased monster Jeffrey Epstein. The filing is significant, not only for the massive fine that it levied against a storied Wall Street institution, but for another peek behind the curtain at how exactly Epstein was able to run his sex trafficking ring and get away with it for so long. The complaint against Deutsche Bank reveals how in 2013, a new manager at Deutsche Bank's wealth management division had a relationship with Epstein. He suggested that they pursue him as a client because he had several $100 million, but more importantly had, quote, a powerful network of friends that he might be able to recommend their businesses to. As in all cases, the bank ran a background check on Epstein, and a memo was prepared for managers detailing how Epstein was a convicted sex offender and included contemporaneous reports that he continued to victimize young girls. Bank managers acknowledged receipt of the memo, then approved his account anyway. That began a years-long relationship in which Epstein would use the bank as a sex trafficking financing hub and would wire money to multiple criminal co-conspirators. The complaint notes that not even 2 months after opening his accounts at Deutsche Bank, Epstein began suspicious bank wires to Eastern European women for unclear and unknown purposes, including at one point a, quote, Russian model and a, quote, Russian PR agent. That fits a very familiar pattern detailed by dozens of Epstein victims who were victimized because Epstein was connected with model and talent scouts who represented young girls and would pay them off to introduce him to a new pool of victims. So the two most damning parts of this complaint by the Department of Financial Services entail how renewed stories into Epstein's predilections began to resurface in 2014. How the highest levels of Deutsche Bank management decided to keep their business with Epstein and then broke their own rules about keeping records about that meeting, claiming that they simply just no longer exist. The other details how Epstein's personal lawyer withdrew more than $800,000 in cash over just a 4-year period for what he claimed were for tipping and other expenses. At one point, Epstein's lawyers asked the bank exactly how much cash that he could take out and how frequently in order to avoid detection by federal authorities. That is a question which, according to the bank's own rules, should have required the bank to immediately contact federal regulators. The bank knew for years that Epstein was likely committing major financial crimes, and they didn't care. They especially didn't care when he was clearly using his accounts to pay off women that were suing him, and in some cases, women who he had procured sexually for himself. The complaint is also especially interesting because it repeatedly refers to a, quote, co-conspirator 2, who is unnamed, but at times in the complaint referred to as a female. It also does not seem like a coincidence that this litany of financial crimes is being detailed publicly only after Ghislaine Maxwell is now behind bars in a New York City jail under high security. The financial crimes of Jeffrey Epstein are not as important as his horrific victimization of young girls for many years. But we have to maintain focus on them because it was these financial crimes which enabled his financial empire, which funded his sex trafficking ring, and through which he cultivated his vast network of powerful friends who he likely lured into his own repulsive exploits. In some cases, it may be that these exploits were even used to enable and enrich his financial wealth. They must be thought of as one and the same. Maxwell's detention in federal custody has spawned a litany of will she talk takes. But the more important question to me is, what is she going to talk about? Maxwell's friends appear to be waging a PR war against anyone who is thinking that Maxwell may stay silent on their behalf. For days now in the press, they say she may expose Bill Clinton, possibly Prince Andrew, and allegedly maintains many of the secret videotapes that Epstein kept in his safe of powerful people performing sexual acts. Will any of the rich and powerful elites who victimized young girls actually be felled by this investigation? We don't know yet for certain. But this new Deutsche Bank complaint is a step in the right direction towards justice. And as Crystal, as we always say here, the real thing is that you had little peeks behind the curtain with every single one of these. And in this particular case, you see this $150 million fine against Deutsche Bank. And I went through and read this whole thing. It's like 40 pages.
Yeah.
Every page is stunning. They're like, oh yeah, he's a pedophile, but he's got a lot of money and he could connect us to other rich people, so green light. 2 months into his account, he's sending money to Eastern European girls. No reason. Nobody knows. He's like, oh yeah, he's paying their tuition. What? Why? Apparently, and according to some of the victims here, he used to do that. He would send girls abroad. He would pay their tuition. When they came back, he would victimize them.
Wow.
So this is all part of the scheme. Paying off Russian models, paying off Russian PR. I mean, all of this under the full guise of these Deutsche Bank regulators. They just didn't care. Over and over again, they knew that he was breaking the law.
Yep.
In one particular case, he was opening a trust with somebody. I suspect it's Ghislaine Maxwell because of the way it's phrased. And they're like, we knew that she was a co-conspirator in a financial crime with Epstein, and we still let the thing go through. And you're reading this, and you're just like, oh my God, like it got away with so much. And the reason I think that we should all care and why so many people are fascinated by this story is this is just one guy. Who knows how many other billionaires are up to this type of stuff? They may not be involved in pedophilia, but they're out there committing the same level of crime. How many other Deutsche Banks, UBS Bank, I mean, all of these, every major Wall Street bank has a wealth management division. How many of these other guys are up to some sketchy stuff like this, and they just get off scot-free?
Yep.
It's crazy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Looting and criminality and pedophilia in this case. I mean, it all just depends so much on what your tax bracket and class status happens to be. To me, that was maybe the most revealing part, and you put it so well that you have to think of these things as one and the same. The victimization and the financial power and the transactions, because it obviously enabled all of this. Deutsche Bank didn't, it would be bad enough if Epstein made the case to them and was begging and pleading for them to take him on as a customer. No.
They sought him out.
They went out and courted him.
Yeah.
They were like, we want this guy. Oh, sure. And they knew. It's not like they didn't know. They had a full memo of all of the things that were on the public record and things that were, very questionable even after he was convicted of sex crimes back in the early 2000s. And they were like, yeah, but he's connected to all these powerful people. So ultimately, it's good for business. Not only are we going to bring him in, not only are we going to use him to try to bring in additional business, but when we see all these sketchy transactions and things that should be red flags without a doubt in your mind, we're just going to look the other way, because ultimately the money matters more than the lives of these young girls.
That's the craziest part to me is you're reading this thing about the lawyer, right? I mean, I can't even go to the bank. If I went to the bank and I was like, hey, I want to withdraw $10,000 over to, not that I have $10,000. I was like, hey, I want to withdraw $10,000 from my bank account or $10,001. Will that trip the regulators? They would call the police. They're supposed to do that when you're a bank. This guy withdrew $800,000 from his bank account over $800,000 for tipping and taxis.
Yeah, okay.
I'm like, wait, first of all, he doesn't take taxis. But second of all, it's like, what? You're for tipping purposes? And then he's like, hey, if I take it, and it was on regular schedules. It was like twice a week, $7,500, not to trip up the regular. And you're like, you're just reading through all of this. And this all comes together because if you pair it with what we also know about the case, which is you've got Israeli Prime Minister hanging out with Epstein, Bill Clinton hanging out with Epstein, we got Bill Gates hanging out with Epstein. You have all these other powerful people, what he used to do. And Bill Gates even said this. He was like, well, I only met with him because he had this whole financial scheme about how he was going to try and fund my nonprofit. So that's why I did. So you can look at it and you can understand that he used all of this network of money and trust and hundreds of millions of dollars to pay off and cultivate this powerful network, which is what enabled him to get away with this for so long. But also, I'm beginning to suspect that it's also the other way, which is that he used victimization of young girls and blackmail on business people in order to transact more money with them. So it's all a gigantic financial conspiracy that was built in order to perpetuate itself. That's the craziest part, which is that I think at its core, Epstein was a pedophile and he was a monster. But he was able to use that to enrich himself dramatically and then use that wealth to protect his pedophilia ring and all of that and ensnare as many as people so he could keep it going on for so long. And it all begins to click together the more that we see of all of this and all the photos with Ghislaine Maxwell, with Trump, and with Elon Musk, and with Bill Clinton hanging out with Kevin Spacey in the throne room, Prince Andrew. I was reading a story today. A lawyer was like, if I was Prince Andrew, I would never leave the United Kingdom again, because if I did, I'm going to get served with 1 million subpoenas and want in order to come and testify just in civil court. Who knows whenever it comes to the federal court. I mean, just the entire thing. It just seems like this gigantic house of cards.
It does, and every layer was necessary to continue perpetuating the victimization that he was able to perpetuate over decades. Let's keep that in mind.
1991, one of these victims.
Decades. So you had to have the money to have access to, Deutsche Bank, to be able to fly, all the things that he did. You had to have the money. You had to have the connections to the powerful people, and you had to have the powerful people keeping silent about everything that was going on. And that's part of why this story is important too, because without that critical piece, without the ensnarement of so many powerful individuals who really knew what was going on, powerful institutions like Deutsche Bank who really knew what was going on, without their complicity, without their silence, the rest of the whole scheme falls apart. None of it is able to continue to operate with impunity, as he did, again, for decades, even after his convictions, if you don't have that piece. So this is yet another window into how it wasn't just, in this individual over here or that individual over there. It was major international institutions of high finance that also participated in looking the other way and enabling this atrocious behavior.
This is one of the most powerful banks on all of Wall Street, and they were bought and paid for basically by Epstein. And look, remember, this is 2013 to 2018, okay? This ain't, we had no idea. So we're going to continue to keep you updated on the story, and I am looking forward to Crystal's Radar. That's next.